This is one of my favorite builds to run while I'm questing. It's awesome for killing multiple enemies at once, so it's going to help you hit those quest goals that you need to hit. I run this a lot, so there's going to be a bunch of little tricks in here that are going to help you be more effective. All right, let's get right into the Frost Gauntlet. The abilities that I like to run on the Frost Gauntlet are Ice Storm, which does AoE and slows enemies, Ice Shower, which stuns enemies that walk into it, and Entombed, which allows you to be invulnerable and gain your mana back really quickly. I'm not going to go over every perk that I use, but there are a few that I find really important. The first of these is Gathering Storm. This is going to give you 15 mana after you land 3 consecutive light attacks. The reason that this is important is because it's going to allow you to kite around enemies almost endlessly. All you're really going to have to do is just spam light attacks and you'll always have mana. I also like to take the Heavy Freeze perk. This is going to make it so that when you heavy shot enemies while they're in Ice Storm, it's going to freeze them for 1 second. This is going to make you a lot more effective when you're kiting around multiple enemies. What I like to do is pull a few enemies at once, kite them around using my Ice Storm to slow them, and then just continuously poking them down with light attacks, and if one of them gets a little too close, I just hit them with a heavy attack, freezing them in the Ice Storm. While I'm doing this, I'm trying to kite around the enemies, baiting them to clump up as close as they possibly can. Once I get them pretty clumped up, I drop my Ice Shower to stun them all. At this point in the fight, I bust out the Great Axe. This is also the point in the video where I'm going to ask you to like it. If you're enjoying, I'd really appreciate it. My personal build uses the Charge ability. What this does is charges you in a certain direction. If you hit an enemy, you're going to stop and swing, doing extra damage to that enemy. You can use this to initiate on the enemies while they're frozen, or if you feel like you're going to be in a little bit of trouble, you can save it so you can disengage later. If you decide you want to save your charge, you can just run it instead, but alongside the charge, I also run Gravity Well. This is going to cast out an area that pulls in enemies and explodes after a short time. The explosion is going to do damage to any of the enemies that are inside the radius. This ability can be used in a few ways. If you're running away, you can throw it at your feet. This is going to pull in all the enemies that are chasing you. This can allow you to do some easy damage or just allow you to completely disengage if you need to. As you can imagine, this ability is really good at clumping up enemies. I really recommend that you take the Crowded Well perk alongside of it. This is going to increase your Gravity Well's damage by 10% for everybody that's hit by the explosion. As for your third ability, you have a couple of options. A lot of people like to run the Reap ability. This isn't my personal preference, but I will explain it a little bit so that way if you do want to run it, you can. This ability is really good at hitting multiple opponents and doing pretty good damage, but where it has its downfall is that it pulls in enemies. Don't get me wrong, this ability is definitely nice while you're PvPing or trying to pull in enemies that are running away, but if you're fighting multiple enemies, they're usually going to be chasing you. In my experience, what tends to end up happening is that you pull in a large group of enemies and then they all just do damage to you as soon as they get close. If you're going to run this, I recommend running the Hunger perk. This is going to heal you for 30% of the damage done by Reap, so if you hit a bunch of enemies with it, you're going to get a good chunk of health back. Just make sure when you use it to time it right so that way you don't take a bunch of damage, but this is more easily said than done. Instead of Reap, what I like to run is the Execute ability. This does 200% weapon damage and increases to 300% if the enemy is under half health. This ability is really good at finishing off enemies and also does massive damage even if you don't finish them off. The reason that I like taking this is because it helps me thin out the herd while I'm kiting enemies, making me kite a little bit more easily. You're going to get a really good feel of when you could use this ability to finish off an enemy. Once you learn this, you're going to be able to go in, finish off somebody quick, and then escape without overexposing yourself too much. You're definitely going to want to take the Unstoppable Greed perk. This is going to make it so the attack is uninterruptible. This is going to be really good in case you miss time casting your ability and manage to cast it while someone's attacking you. What's going to happen is you're going to take the damage from the enemy, but your attack is still going to go off. As long as you don't get hit by any more attacks, you're not going to get staggered, so that way you can escape after you cast this attack. Getting staggered is really bad because once you get hit once, all the other enemies are just going to start swinging at you and you're going to get hit a bunch of times. Going back to the Execute ability, it's not really great for hitting multiple targets, but if you do get used to it, you can manage to hit at least 2 enemies at once. This build and playstyle has a really high potential for getting yourself into trouble, so you're going to want to make sure that you're carrying around a lot of food with you to heal yourself back up. Keep in mind that you can pop the food while you're in combat if you need to. Just make sure that you don't get hit or it's going to cancel the increased health regen that the food is going to give you. If you think you're going to get hit, all you got to do is cast the Entombed ability. What this is going to do is make you invulnerable. You're still going to get the increased health regen from food if you hadn't been hit yet. You're also going to get a lot of mana back really quickly while you're Entombed. Make sure that you remember that when you left click while you're leaving your Entombed, it's going to knock all the enemies back away from you. If you do want to keep them grouped up around you, just right click and you'll escape it without pushing the enemies away. So that way they stay clumped up and you can do damage to multiple of them at once if you need to. The biggest thing that you want to be aware of while you're running this ability is the ranged enemies. They can oftentimes be really hard to keep track of, and if you get hit by them, it's going to stagger you and all the melee enemies are going to catch up to you, and it's just going to be really bad. To prevent this from happening, focus down the ranged enemies first. You can cut around the melee enemies pretty easily and just focus on dodging the ranged attacks coming in, and you can kind of run around in circles and just go back and hit the ranged enemies once or twice and then just keep circling around them, or you can just use your Ice Gauntlet and finish them all the way down with that. The reason that I don't do this a whole lot is because I spec mostly into strength so that my Ice Gauntlet doesn't do a whole lot of damage. I mostly just use it for the CC. The crowd control attacks actually allow me to do one of my favorite things with this build, and that is find chest easier. Well, you don't actually find the chest easier, it just allows you to go around the area and look for them easier. Because of your crowd control, you can just run around the area pulling as many enemies as you want and just throwing down the abilities behind you, and you could run around until you find those chests and then usually use one of the crowd control abilities to stun them. Or if you don't think you have enough time for this, you at least know where the chest is now, so that way you can disengage and just come back straight to the chest. I can't tell you how many times I've run around without this build and just been looking for a chest forever and not been able to find it. And while I'm doing this, I'm forced to fight like 50 different enemies because I can't escape them. It gets really, really annoying, and this build really takes that away. So going back to my spec, I usually do go mostly into attack and focus most of my damage through the battle axe. When you're looking for items, you're going to want to look for items that end with of the battle mage. This is the category that's going to increase both your intelligence and your strength. For my armor, I like to stay within the medium threshold, so that way I still have a decently effective dodge, but can also tank some damage if I need to. If I'm doing dungeon runs, I usually just keep my build the same. I don't want to be tanking damage. I just want to be doing damage, mostly with my Great Axe. I just got to be aware that I don't pull in too much aggro, but what you can also do is just respec into intelligence and completely focus on doing damage with your Ice Gauntlet. This is going to allow you to do some pretty good damage while staying at a range, so it makes it a little bit easier to manage than being in the thick of things with a melee weapon. Again, when things are dropping in dungeons, you want to be looking for things with intelligence and strength. If you want to sell some items that you find in dungeons, make sure to check out this video here. Also, if you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.